CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 8 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. We have a very special edition show for you tonight as the world holds its breath. Benjamin Netanyahu has just been speaking, and he says that the actions in Gaza are just the beginning. Israeli troops have apparently been conducting missions into Gaza. We will go to Gaza shortly, but I'm also going to be closer to home talking about this. The BBC is still not referring to Hamas as a terror group. They continue to defend that policy as more reports of shocking atrocities emerge. Does it become harder and harder to defend the BBC's position? Around the world, though, there were calls for an international day of jihad, an international day of rage. We did previously see violent clashes in Rome, violent clashes in Paris, and an individual was stabbed to death in France as well. I believe we can go live now to New York, where there is the beginning. Yep, there we go, as a Free Palestine march taking place. So that is going on right now in New York. Again, we'll take you there to the scene. And we're also, as well, going to be talking about this, the Wembley Arch row. Yes, that famous, iconic Wembley Arch will not be lit up with the colours of the Israeli flag, which is strange, isn't it? Because it was lit up with the colours of the French flag, the Turkish flag, and, of course, the Pride flag as well, just before we went to Qatar for the World Cup. I've got Will Geddes, international security expert. I've got Emma Wolfe as well, and everybody's favourite Josh Howie, who's going to tell me what it was really like to drop his kids off at a Jewish primary school today. He said that it shouldn't have had to have felt like a brave thing to do. A damning indictment of where we are right now in Britain. Patrick Christys, GB News. I also want to know from you, do you think that we should cancel the massive protest due to take place in London tomorrow? 1,000 police officers being roped in to deal with that. GB Views at gbnews.com, but right now it's your headlines.
Very good evening to you. It is 2 minutes past 8 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Well, as you've been hearing, Israel's Prime Minister has delivered a stark warning to Palestinians. Their week-long retaliation against Hamas is just the beginning. Thousands of people are fleeing northern Gaza after the Israeli army ordered more than 1 million residents to move south by the end of the day for their own safety. Benjamin Netanyahu said, "We will or for how long," but a ground offensive is thought to be imminent. Israel says its infantry has already carried out localised raids in Gaza in an effort to locate Hamas rocket sites and hostages. The United Nations says the evacuation order is horrendous and should be withdrawn because it's impossible to comply without devastating humanitarian consequences. Gaza remains under siege with fuel, food and water running out. A Reuters video journalist has been killed while working in southern Lebanon. A quick warning, some viewers may find the footage distressing. Wissam Abdallah was part of a team based in Alma al-Shab near the Israeli border, providing a live signal. Reuters say they are working with authorities and supporting Issam's family and colleagues. 2 other journalists, Thayer al-Sudani and Maher Nazeh, were injured. The President of the European Commission was forced to evacuate to a shelter shortly after arriving in Israel earlier. Well, Ursula von der Leyen was meeting the Israeli President Isaac Herzog when the sirens were heard, warning of a possible rocket attack. Earlier, she and the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, visited the village of Kfar Aza in a show of solidarity with the Israeli people. It was among a number of communities overrun by Hamas terrorists on Saturday when more than 1,300 people were killed. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues to amass tanks and troops near Gaza ahead of an expected ground incursion. Almost 1,800 people have died in the enclave as a result of Israeli airstrikes, which are continuing. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where troops are on high alert after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls to stay out of the conflict. And the Prime Minister says terrorism must not be allowed to prevail in Israel or Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has been meeting northern European allies in Sweden. The gathering comes amid concern about the possible sabotage of an undersea gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia. He has called the Joint Expeditionary Force the first line of defence against the threat posed by Russia. France has raised its security alert to the highest level possible following the death of a teacher in a knife attack. It happened at a high school in the northern city of Arras. 2 other teachers also sustained injuries. A suspect has been arrested. Police say he is a Russian-born Chechen and a former student of the high school. President Macron has described the incident as barbaric Islamist terrorism. Well, this is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now it's back to Patrick.
Should Britain ban pro-Palestine marches like France has? Tomorrow, 1,000 police officers are going to be diverted away from stabbings, domestic violence and rape, etc., to go and make sure that a load of people waving the Palestinian flag don't cross that line and commit a mass anti-Semitic hate crime in London. And let's be honest, it won't just be in London, will it? No. So France has banned the protests. They got the water cannons out. They went in with batons. They whacked out the smoke grenades. We're seeing similar things, actually, in Rome, in Italy. There we go, right now. We're constantly told, aren't we, when you look at that, we're constantly told that we have to be the tolerant ones in this country. You know what? I'm sick of it. I'm actually sick of it. I think we are too tolerant of intolerance. Anti-Semitic hate has risen by about 400% in the last few days alone. We've got people tearing down protesters, posters even, of missing Jewish children. We've got Jewish schools closed. We've got people taking off their Stars of David and hiding their faith. I think it's ridiculous. We have no real push for people to integrate in this country. The second somebody speaks the truth, which is that multiculturalism has essentially failed and that we are importing groups of people who hate other groups of people while doing nothing to preserve or protect our own culture at all, they're shouted down. Our police force over here, they don't want to stoke racial tensions. Fine, I can understand that, absolutely. Often then they sit back, though, and just let things happen. The irony, of course, is that racial tensions have already been stoked, and it's nothing to do with the vast majority of ordinary people walking our streets. We are now very often living with the racial tensions of some other nations and some other cultures, and we just have to let that spill out on our streets. We do seem to have imported lots of extreme views, lots of extreme ideologies. I think we're going to see that play out on our capital streets tomorrow. I look at countries like Egypt, a country that claims to support Palestine and yet does not want to accept people from that Hamas-riddled region. I can't help but wonder if that tells you everything you need to know. GBViews at gbnews.com is that email address. I want to know whether or not you think that the scheduled protests for London and possibly elsewhere in the UK as well tomorrow should go ahead. But in the last half hour, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a short news conference. He began by saying that he's spoken to families who've lost loved ones today and Israel will never forget these horrific acts of our enemies. He went on to say, we are striking at our enemies with unprecedented might. This is just the beginning. We are going to eradicate Hamas. We are going to bring victory. So that is the very latest that from Benjamin Netanyahu, who just spoke in the last few minutes. But joining me now is GB News presenter and columnist for the Jewish Chronicle. It's Josh Howie. Josh, thank you very much. Look, first things first, I was very moved by a tweet that you posted this morning, which is that you taking kids to school should not feel like a heroically brave act. Do you just want to explain maybe a bit about what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, this it's been a grim week for everyone, not just the Jewish community. And it's so grim, obviously, that I'm being wheeled out before a certain time to not be funny. But yeah, this morning it was there was a lot of debate in the WhatsApp groups, and I'm sure any parents out there are members of these WhatsApp groups are a total pain in the butt. But it was going on about whether it was safe to bring the children to school. Other Jewish schools in some area have closed down, and ours decided to stay open. And yeah, we decided to send the kids in, partly because my homeschooling is so terrible after lockdown, and partly in defiance. And there was a lot of extra security. I mean, the fact that there's security at all at a primary school in this country is mental. This is why I don't think... This is a question I don't think gets asked enough, which is, just out of interest, why is there full-time security outside synagogues and Jewish schools? But people don't like when you ask that question. Well, yeah, of course, because we're afraid of some nutter and coming in, and we saw it in France, and in primary school, you see it in different parts around the world, and coming in and of course hurting, killing our children, and that's the fact that that's a constant threat. But this obviously has escalated, this global day of jihad. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to ask a question now that I hope I never have to ask. How was the global day of jihad for you? It was, it was just a lot of fun. No, it was a weird thing to live through, right? No, it's crazy. It's because you're questioning your fellow human beings as you're worried walking down the road. You're worried being on the tube, coming into work. My wife is really scared, and it just wears you down. I'm just, to be honest, I'm a bit exhausted. I'm fluctuating because obviously this is coming off the back of a week of images and that can't not pay a certain psychic toll for anybody who's seen them. No, of course. Whether you're Jewish or not. No, and just on that, I know that obviously it's night time in Gaza at the moment. There are live feeds that come through which occasionally show the odd explosion, etc. I wonder if we might be able to, at some point, just have a quick look. Yeah, so obviously there's not a huge amount doing at the moment there, but that is Gaza City, believe it or not. Now,
the point of why I'm showing you what is a largely black screen at the minute is because this has played out to a series of raids in the last couple of hours, hour or so, by Israeli forces. Excuse me, by Israeli forces. You see the old flash there. That will be a sign that something is going on. If we come back to us here now, I want to just bring into this discussion is a human rights lawyer. It's David Haig, who's a regular on the channel, regular on the show. David, thank you very much. Great to have you on. Now, the reason I asked you on, apart from the fact that we just like your company, of course, is what is happening in Gaza now, right, is they're being told to get out, a lot of these people, and there's going to be some kind of incursion, and then we'll have to see what happens after that. There is, of course, a blockade as well taking place. And look, David, do you think that's all right? Do you think this is OK from a human rights perspective on this?
Good evening to you both, Patrick, as well. I mean, look, obviously, I'll start this by saying, basically, Hamas are terrorists. I'm not the BBC. I've got no issue in saying that at all. The problem, the worry that I have from a human rights perspective is that 2 million people in the Gaza Strip are not all terrorists. They are humans, and their human rights are considerably being at risk now, including their lives. You've effectively the Israelis have effectively told half of the country to move in 24 hours. That is impossible. There is going to be a catastrophe there. Now that's the issue that we've had, and there are so many ways you can look at that, whether it's risk to life, but also where do these people go? They cannot go across the border into Israel. They cannot go across the border into Egypt. They are stuck in a cage, and that is a very, very serious issue.
David, I'll come back to you. Josh, I want to bring you in on this because do you think it is all right to, I suppose, deny things like water, electricity and food to a group of people? I can understand that if you thought that those people, or not just thought, if they are going to attack you, then I suppose I would probably do the same.
Israel and Gaza are now in a state of war. In a state of war, you do not have to feed the people who are presently holding 100 of your citizens, probably sexually abusing them, of some of the people that we've seen on the evidence. Israel wants to, I imagine, go in there, make... it's not about this sort of eye for an eye or whatever. It's about Israel has to protect its citizens. I mean, it's a sovereign nation. And the thing is also, look, I'm Jewish, but here we are, 3,000 miles away. It's not up to us. It's up to the Israelis, the Israeli government, the people they've voted in, to protect themselves. And we can opine on all of this stuff. It doesn't matter. It's not up to us to tell them what to do.
Yeah, David, if there's a group of people there in Gaza who are committing war crimes already, are a designated terror group, I mean, does Israel have a responsibility to make sure that that bit of land there is well-fed, well-watered and has electricity? I'm not sure they do they?
Look, I understand that, obviously what's happened, they have a right to defend their territory. But, Josh mentioned that this is a war against Gaza, Gaza. Is it a war against Gaza or is it a war against Hamas? Now, the two, I know that Hamas is very well in all of Gaza, but it really isn't and shouldn't be a war against Gaza and all the people in there. There should be a war about terrorists and getting them out. And that's going to take, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to take a long time, but it certainly shouldn't be a war against Gaza, as Josh said. And I think that's
well, that's semantics in terms of that's like saying, in World War II, it was the Allies against Germany. You could say we're against the Nazis. Of course, I appreciate your point. Let me change it. Let's just say Hamas. But the two are unfortunately intrinsically linked. They were democratically elected, and that's not to say that I or any humane human being wants any innocent people to be hurt in any way. But of course, in the argument, and anybody who watches any of these debates goes, that Israel, the IDF, exists to protect its citizens. And of course, Hamas are doing the opposite by putting their citizens as human shields in front of it. And also, the other thing is, of course, is what are Israel expected to do in this situation? What do they expect? They've got 100 of their citizens. They've got to go and get them.
Yeah, David, this is why it's such a mess, isn't it? Because in the coming days, we're going to see a lot of action, and there's going to be so much condemnation on either side. But I suppose, you know, what do people, what would Israelis want their government and their army to do? You know.
I think that you're right, Patrick. It's a mess, but I think the US Secretary of Defense mentioned, said something quite well. It's about resolve and not revenge, and it may be the decisions of the people in that region, that whether it's the Israelis or Hamas, that are important, but the implications of those decisions for the rest of the world. We've seen the protests here. We already have problems with asylum and migration in other parts of Europe. You've got Egypt to one side, you've got Israel to the other, you've got the Mediterranean as well. So this can implicate asylum. It's the implications for everyone in the world of what happens next is significant.
Sorry, I just want to say that almost sounds like we have to, or not we, Israel has to consider the appeasement of people on other, in the UK and their response, whatnot, who might protest about this. I mean, that's not their priority at the moment. And I also say, I just want to say that when there's all the other thing that always comes up here is, these protests tomorrow, why don't they go to the Egyptian embassy and protest and say, open a corridor for the civilians? Why Israel has said food and these other things can go in. They're just saying, we're not going to do it. That's not, and the condemning of Hamas, they're not the ones who've stockpiled the food, who've used their resources, the billions that have been given to them over the last however many decades, decade and a half, and they've used the water systems, the pipes to build bombs. Yeah. So it's their responsibility. Look,
both of you, we're going to have to draw a line here because we've got a heck of a lot to fit in. But thank you, both of you, very much. I do appreciate it. It's David Haig there, human rights lawyer, also as well. Josh Howie, who's been joining me in the studio as well. So thank you very, very much, both of you. Now, coming up, with the help of my panel, yes, I will be looking into our National Broadcasting Service's decision to still not call Hamas terrorists and see what everyone else has to say about that. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. Now, the Jewish Board of Deputies have written to the BBC over their refusal to call Hamas terrorists. 5 lawyers have also written to the regulator, Ofcom, and accused the broadcaster of failing to show impartiality beyond doubt. The looming question is, have the BBC fallen well below its standards expressed in its editorial values? The fact is that, according to its own editorial values, it could call Hamas a designated terror group. Hamas is indeed a designated terror group. They would just be stating fact. It is as though they are choosing not to. As more atrocities emerge, pretty much by the hour, committed by Hamas against innocent Israelis, many of them babies, actually, and indeed in some cases, some horrific cases, pregnant women, you wonder why on earth are they not just calling it what it is? But joining me now to discuss this is the former chief executive of Channel 5, former producer of the BBC, is David Elstein. David, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. What do you make of this, then? Is the BBC showing its true colours here? Have they let the nation down or not?
It's slightly more complex than you presented, and it's not just the BBC, because if you watch Sky or ITN, you too, with those organisations, will see they don't call Hamas as an organisation a terrorist organisation. But I think that's slightly beside the point. That's not a function for broadcasters, that's a function for governments. And people can make their own judgment as to what the organisation is. The problem with the BBC is they haven't acknowledged that the acts that were carried out on Saturday and Sunday were terrorist acts. It doesn't matter. There's no issue of impartiality in terms of describing acts as they are. It's a duty under the BBC's editorial guidelines to show due accuracy. Accuracy trumps impartiality all the way down the line. So the correct issue is, were these acts of terrorism? They were. Should they be described as such? Yes, they should. All of the broadcasters should do that. Not calling them acts of terror is in itself a value judgment, because
exactly. This is the point, right? This is the point. When you completely ignore the truth of the situation, so calling terrorist acts, then in a way you have picked a side, haven't you? And I find that bizarre, really, that, you know, yet again, when it comes to this kind of issue, the BBC appears to be biased and have its finger off the pulse of the nation, no?
Well, it's not a matter of bias, it's a matter of misunderstanding their duty. They think there's something to do with impartiality here. There is not. There's no issue of impartiality in doing your journalistic duty, which is to accurately describe the acts that you are showing on your screens. So let's take for instance, there are roughly 17 UK citizens, as far as we know, who were victims of the Saturday attack. If Hamas had come to London and killed 17 Jews living in London, what would the BBC have described that act as? A militant act? An act by gunmen? Of course not. They'd have called it what it was, a terrorist act. So they're getting hung up on the fact that there is a debate between Palestinians, not just Hamas, but also Fatah and other Palestinian factions, and Israel. That has been for 100 years, and there will be probably for another 100 years. That has no influence at all on your journalistic duty, which is to describe the news as you find it.
All right, David, thank you very, very much. Always appreciate your time. David Elstein there, former producer at the BBC, former chief exec of Channel 5. I'm just going to whiz us over to New York quickly, because there are scenes taking place at the moment. So we've seen issues in France, in the Netherlands, in Sydney. We saw scenes in Rome recently as well. So this is New York, right, where there is a big pro-Palestine march taking place. Thousands of people taking part in it. This is just a snippet of it, of course. People marching through New York. Right, back to me in Paddington now, and I'm going to go to my panel, not before time. I've got author and journalist Emma Wolfe. I've got international security analyst Will Geddes as well. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. As always, ladies first here. So, Emma, did you buy that, or was that just a load of tosh designed to get the BBC out of jail, do you think?
No, I think there's a few things going on. I think the BBC are incredibly nervous. I think they took they don't want to be seen to be taking sides. They're obsessed with impartiality, right? So they didn't come out from the beginning and say and call Hamas terrorists. And then they kind of double down and no one acts. No one says, come on, we need to correct this immediately, in which case it wouldn't be a story now. What I really object to is the utter irrelevance of all this. Do you think the parents of murdered babies, do you think those brutalised women give a toss about what we are, whatever terms we're using? The BBC were wrong. They should have corrected the error. But we are so out of touch when we get tied up in this stuff. This outrage about who calls it what by what word. No, people are being murdered and we are pearl clutching about this, Patrick.
I think one of the big problems with it...
we shouldn't even be discussing this. We should be focusing on what matters.
Is it symptomatic of whether or not the BBC or other broadcasters would cover what is really happening, which we will come on to now, which is absolutely indefensible atrocities that people seem to...
But they're clearly indefensible.
Well, yeah, you hope so.
Yeah, but I think there's more to it. I think it's actually deeper rooted than that, and I think there is actually a very valuable point as to this issue and this discussion about BBC that we as taxpayers are funding in terms of their representation of what's going on. I have guys on the ground in Israel. There is stuff going on down there. Last weekend, my phone blew up with various different images, videos and the like, which even the MSM can't publish. They can't broadcast.
Yeah,
it's too horrific. Right. Hamas, and this is where this ambiguity, this fog is kicking in. There is a question of whether there's misreporting by the BBC. And I know that's a very serious allegation. But there is a lot of information that's going down there which substantiates and also supports the point of emphasising the fact that Hamas, as a prescribed terrorist group, should be designated as and reported as a terrorist group.
Yeah.
People are forgetting that there are three elements here. And, you know, looking at the footage that you had there, Patrick, in New York, you've got Israel, you've got Palestine, and you have Hamas. There are three separate groups. The Hamas even victimised Palestinians. So there's a great deal more at play here, and I think it's really important that the national broadcaster gets it right.
So these, again, live images now of what's taking place in New York. Emma, are you concerned by this day of rage, it's been called? And for me, what it has done is expose that we have societies within societies, and I think this is why this particular round of the Israeli-Palestine conflict has hit home.
Really hit a nerve.
Yeah.
I wonder why it is, because everybody you speak to has been affected by this in some way, even if they don't have links with the Jewish community. I was cycling through Stamford Hill this morning, and I heard you talking to Josh earlier before, and obviously Josh was actually delivering his kids to school there.
Yeah.
But all the schools, Patrick, have security outside, and that is normal for lots of Jewish schools, although that's kind of worrying. It shouldn't be at all. But the security presence around there is heightened, and the fear on the street in London in 2023 is palpable. So, yeah, I mean, you know, what is going on is absolutely indefensible, whatever we call it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I'd certainly say in terms of the Jewish community, and I've got some very good friends within that community, at the moment, they are being very robust, very resilient, but they are also very conscious of this threat. And this day of rage, this is just literally Khaled Mashal putting out a worldwide publicity sort of snippet, or if you like, taste or bite for the media to pick up on and try and promote Hamas.
Well, it's worked when it comes to places like Yemen, etc. as well. Just very quickly, Will, could I just go back to this?
Sure.
When do you think we're likely to see an Israeli ground incursion into Gaza? I know we've had raids, they've said. We don't know whether or not they've managed to get any hostages released or anything. Well, how do you see this planning out in the next 48 hours?
OK, so it's going to turn into a fibula situation, a fighting in built-up areas scenario, where you're going to have, fundamentally, special forces taking the arrowhead of it, looking at key emplacements, and this is where the US intelligence instruments are being used, satellite imagery is being used, local assets within Palestine are being used to actually designate and determine where Hamas are. They're going to be using Palestinians as human shields.
As we talk, by the way, sorry to cut across you,
sure.
This is Gaza live now, and everyone will be able to see, if you're watching us on TV or online, that there appears to be a monumental fireball in the sky there, which was not there before, which would imply that some rockets, etc., are being fired in. I don't know whether or not, Will, maybe you'll be able to shed a bit of light on this.
Yeah, I mean, this could be very well used to illuminate particular areas. Remember that a lot of the power's been cut off, the utilities have been cut off within Gaza. But the one thing that one's got to bear in mind is that, you know, the Israeli Defence Force are not going in there and indiscriminately killing everybody who's in their path. They are going in on very targeted strikes into particular areas. And many of the buildings, a lot of the Palestinians that are based, and the innocent Palestinians based in Gaza, are being given sufficient warning. They've been doing leafleting, obviously leaflet drops. They've been doing, obviously, what we call soft drops, which is where they send in an ordnance which isn't necessarily going to explode. It's not going to cause massive damage, but it's a warning to basically say, you've got to get out of here, because if you don't...
Is that enough? Are people able? Because we've been hearing about, you know, it's not as simple as evacuating Gaza.
But it's
you know, you
like
can't
Mosul.
get part out. Is it enough?
Not that much far from, say, what we saw in Mosul, the last stand for Islamic State, where they had a lot of Iraqis literally held within that city, and they were holding them there prisoner, these civilians. Hamas are cowards. They're doing exactly the same. They're using Palestinians as human shields.
Yeah, and they're embedding, you know, weapon stores in hospitals and in heavily built-up areas, and really using their own people against them.
There is footage coming out of what appears to be them surrounding themselves with children.
Yeah.
So that so just in case then, you know, let's say Israel does... you know, drop a missile or something on that, well, then that's the next round of propaganda, I suppose, isn't it? Look, what you're looking at now is Gaza City skyline. We're going to come back to that as that particular flame has just been extinguished. I'll also come back to my panel very, very shortly. Thank you very much for everything so far. Now, that day of rage's impact has been seen across the world. We're taking a closer look at what's been happening here in the UK as we gear up for a massive protest, a massive demonstration tomorrow. 1,000 police officers involved. I'll be asking, should we just call the whole thing off? Patrick Christys, GB News. It's Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching. Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, this week, the former Hamas chief, Khaled Mashal, calls for protests across the Muslim world today in support of the Palestinians and for the peoples of neighbouring countries to join the fight against Israel. Well, the implications of the former Hamas chief's call have been seen actually right across the world, not just the so-called Arab world or the Muslim world. We've had school closures over here. We've had a 400% rise in anti-Semitic abuse. We've had shocking footage emerging of 2 women in North London tearing down posters of innocent Israeli children. They've even been taken hostage, of course, by Hassan. And one woman was shouting, "This is for Palestine." Earlier today, I spoke to Nita Fabish, who is the British-Israeli woman who filmed that now famous encounter of the women ripping down the posters. She actually fled Israel for Britain just a few days ago, but now she's scared to show her Jewish faith in public. Here's a little snippet of our chat earlier.
I was hanging up the flyers, and after several different incidents, including ones which I didn't catch on camera, 3 people, I didn't manage to catch all 3 of them in the video, came and they started tearing down the leaflets. One of them came up to me, he stuck his middle finger up at me whilst shouting "Free Palestine," very aggressively. And then I saw somebody else, an onlooker, filming, so I quickly got my phone out and filmed the second half of the incident, which is what you can see in the video. So a man approached me and he asked me what I was hanging up. He read the leaflet and he started shouting at me that this is karma for the Jewish people. They've gotten what they've deserved. Their people have brought this upon themselves. And I didn't engage because I was by myself, and also I've been in Israel this week and I managed to get back 2 days ago, and I just didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with the interaction.
Right, so my panel are back with me now. I've got author and journalist Emma Wolf, got international security analyst Will Geddes. Emma, I'll be honest with you, when I looked at that last night, I thought, for all this talk of multiculturalism and diversity is our greatest strength, I thought, well, it's not working there, is it?
It's not, and look, passions are running high and there's a lot of grief and outrage and anger. I just keep focusing on the fact that innocent civilians are dying, babies and grandmothers and parents and young people. I'm not really taking sides on this. I just simply keep thinking of the innocent civilians who have no idea. These babies have no idea what, a border is, or a crossing, or a religion, or a faith, or an ideology is. They just are absolute wasted lives.
They are. And, Will, how bad is that humanitarian situation going to get in the coming days, do you think?
It's going to get really bad. It's already bad.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest challenges that the UN have right now is trying to get resupply in of, obviously, food and supplies, obviously, to civilians. The issue, I mean, I go with your points of what you were saying about not taking sides. I do take sides. I take Israel's side, obviously, in terms of being the victims of this situation. And again, I think, as your guest earlier was saying, Patrick, if this could carried out in the United Kingdom or anywhere else in the world, then we would all really be standing by.
Just a quick one. The images that are on the screen now are in stark contrast to a lot of the images that we've been seeing elsewhere. So this, I believe, is in Washington. DC.
Yeah.
And this is a pro-Israel march. A lot of the other marches have been pro-Palestine. So yeah, there was some ones before anyway that were in Israel. I think this one now is just a replay. Yeah, this is a replay of some of the scenes at the aftermath of London. What we were looking at then, we could see so many Israeli flags. Of course, is in Washington a pro-Israeli march. But yes, sorry, carry on.
I mean, really sort of cutting to the quick on this, Patrick, because I know you're limited on time. The issue is the Palestinians are not helping themselves in this situation, endorsing what Hamas have done here. The fact is that, again, there is very little reported, and I'd love to see more in the media about how Palestinians are victimised by Hamas, where they will torture people, they will kidnap children, they will do these things against Palestinians. And I think those that are here, that are sympathetic to Palestine, many of which who are out protesting, are protesting at the wrong time. The optics for them is not going to work to their favour.
Can I ask a question of you both as men?
Yeah.
How is any fighter able to do what they have been doing? How are these men, and it is men, how are these men who are fathers, who are brothers, who are husbands, who are, you know...
It's Islamic extremism.
How are they able to cut a baby from a pregnant woman's womb? How are they able to shoot a child, to tie children up, to burn nurseries? How are they able to do that?
Yeah, but sadly, in this world, there are evil people. And there are evil people who are going to go out there with a distorted agenda to carry out these things. Otherwise, people like me wouldn't exist, unfortunately. There is a situation here where people will... I've seen atrocities across the world, from Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan...
It's a reminder of how powerful the ideology is, that men can go into homes and do that.
Having operated in combat zones, I also know that there are things that we will see, that we're protecting people against, that you will see atrocities being committed here, and there is no fathoming of why people will carry out these things.
Well, can I ask, the hostage situation, I know that everyone's deeply concerned about it. I had a Jewish friend of mine message me to actually ask this question of you.
Yeah.
What are the chances of getting hostages out alive, do you think?
I think there is a good chance, and I think your friend can hold hope that they can potentially get them back. We've got to remember, in the first instance, this is not conventional kidnappings, and I've dealt with enough of those, where it is a transactional process. And there will be some bargaining. It could have a political agenda, but there usually is money that's behind it in 90% of these instances. In the case of these Israelis that have been kidnapped, I think in terms of some of these people, they won't have been treated well, that's for sure. I think, secondly, the other issue is that they will be held in various key locations. They will also be moved. As Gaza is coming under strike, it's going to be down to local assets in Gaza who are going to be feeding intel to the intelligence agencies to give positioning of where they possibly are being held.
And surely these hostages are going to be very kind of very valuable social media tools. You know, every killing will be filmed. You know, the revolution will be televised.
And it could go on for ages.
Every single killing will be shown on Twitter.
But the thing is, when you actually do a forced rescue, that is always the last resort in any kind of hostage recovery situation. That is really the end game. But that's usually when you feel that the hostage is going to be potentially covered.
All right, OK, both of you, thank you very much. We will come back to you. Now, coming up, the FA are facing serious criticism for not lighting up the Wembley arch in the colours of the Israeli flag for tonight's England versus Australia friendly. Not, of course, that you should be watching that right now at this particular time. You should be watching us here. But how far should organisations go when it comes to showing their support for international events? We've seen it with Ukraine, we've seen it with the LGBT flag, we've seen it with France, etc., etc., etc. Why not this? Patrick Christys, GBNews, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, the FA have found themselves in extremely hot water today after they decided not to light up the Wembley arch in the colours of the Israeli flag. The decision has caused outrage, given the FA's track record, as you will be able to see if you're watching us on your TV screens now, of lighting it up in a variety of different causes. That, I believe, is the Ukrainian flag. There's the LGBTQ+ flag. We've had it France, Turkey as well. Anyway, this sparks an interesting debate. To what extent should organisations become involved in international events and potentially political affairs? Joining me to discuss this is a fan favourite at GB News and one of our contributors, presenter occasionally as well. It's the wonderful Albi Amankona. Albi, of the FA scored an own goal here.
I think the FA are in a really difficult spot because one of the things that they've been doing recently is they have been taking positions on social issues. They've taken positions on LGBT rights by lighting up the Wembley arch in the pride colours, as you just showed our viewers watching. They have taken positions on Black Lives Matter, with teams taking the knee before football matches. And they've also taken positions on conflicts, as we've seen them light up the Wembley arch in the Ukraine colours. And, of course, after terrorist attacks, I think they lit the flag up in the French tricolour. So they've taken positions on this before, and I think that makes it difficult when they're deciding not to light up the arch in the Israeli colours. However, one thing that we've also got to remember is that I think at the friendly between Australia today, there was a minute's silence before the match and the players were wearing black armbands. So some people might argue that actually they are showing their appreciation and respect that way.
I think some people in football, they always bang on, don't they, about we can't have politics and sport mixing, despite the fact that they are always so intent on mixing politics and sport. Yes, I am talking about Gary Lineker. And then you end up with situations like this, where they find it deeply controversial, they don't know which side to take, and so they keep quiet, and it almost highlights the hypocrisy in that sense, I think.
I guess my question would be, is it hypocrisy, or are we annoyed that the FA isn't doing enough?
Yeah.
Because they are actually doing something. There was a minute's silence before the match today. They're wearing black armbands. If the argument is they're not doing enough, then fair enough. If the argument is they're not doing anything at all, but look at what they've done with these other things, that's not credible.
It's a good point, that. It's a very good point, that. So I'll go over to you, Emma. Do you think the FA should have picked a side?
It's tricky, and also, is lighting up the arch with the Israeli flag, as, you know, Number 10 Downing Street did, finally, after a day or two, Is that taking sides, or is it just showing respect and showing, you know, the world stands with you, we are thinking of you? It's probably, yeah, I can see that it's seen as taking sides. I come back to the BBC point. To me, it feels a little bit irrelevant. I've always felt that, you know, overpaid footballers taking the knee over things like this.
And then going and playing in Saudi.
And then going and playing and following the money wherever they want to. And often they don't really understand what they're talking about. They, you know, if you ask them why are they taking the knee, most of them wouldn't know. So I think it's kind of irrelevant. But actually, given the situation, it seems odd that they've taken their position on so many other of these issues and not this one.
Maybe it's symptomatic, actually, Will, of the fact that there is a huge amount of feeling out there that what's going on in Palestine is wrong, and that whilst you know, Hamas terrorists have committed atrocities, that people really do not agree with everything that Israel does.
Yeah, well, they may very well do that, but then you could put into question the Ukraine flag colours being obviously shown on the arch then, because there are, I know certainly some Ukrainian Russians who've been very, very quiet. You know, there is, you know, as they always say, there's two sides to every story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. So in terms of them not showing, obviously, the colours in solidarity to Israel, it basically just shows that they're literally virtue signalling as and when they feel it's appropriate time and what is the most current, you know, subject they want to promote, which is a bit rubbish. And besides, I follow rugby.
Besides, you follow rugby, maybe that's the way to go. I do think it does maybe highlight, Albie, how some of this virtue signalling is often just a fashion trend, actually. So, yeah, it's very fashionable at times, and certainly less controversial to have backed Ukraine.
Very fashionable, very. Everybody was wearing blue and yellow. It was actually cool to have a little blue and yellow flag on your cheek.
And I would argue sometimes that I think the pride flag can be massively overused for commercial gain during...
sometimes.
Whatever. Yeah, a lot of the time. Well, you can't do that with the Israeli flag, so that's why they don't do it.
Well, I guess the question is, should football and the FA be taking political positions at all?
Exactly.
Yeah. If your opinion is that they shouldn't, then you should be arguing that they shouldn't be lighting up the flag, Israeli colours, and there shouldn't be a minute's silence, there shouldn't be any of that. But there also shouldn't be taking the knee for BLM, there also shouldn't be pride flags.
They've started, so they'll finish.
But they've set a dangerous precedent, because from now on, there's going to be big question marks about whatever else they decide to vote.
I actually quite hope that this... Well, I mean, it won't, but this draws...
But maybe they'll stop.
Yeah.
And also, there's no downside when we think about the rainbow flag. I mean, there's rainbow flags on a crossing on my street corner. There's no downside to whacking a rainbow flag on your bank or your shop or your rainbow crossing or on your police uniform and saying, we stand with the LGBT community. There's no downside. Whereas here, it's a more difficult situation.
There is a security dynamic. I mean, obviously, you've got the issue of a far more fragmented and disenchanted group, which, if they offended, could see it as a viable target. Now, I know the FA takes counter-terrorism very seriously, and they're looking at, obviously, ensuring that anybody who goes there is going to be safe. However, the problem you have with Hamas and that bunch of lunatics and cowards is that they will have the individuals, the lone actors who want to carry out their attacks. We have the threat from international terrorism. This is just another dynamic to add to it.
This is another dynamic. Albie, just quickly, if that's all right, we are due to have quite a big demonstration tomorrow in London. A call for about 1,000 police are going to be there. People saying maybe we should have done what's happened in France, which is to say this is banned. Of course, the protests there still went ahead. They just got the water cannons out, which I'm not saying that we should necessarily do. Do you think that we should be saying now we're going to ban protests for public order when it comes to Palestine?
Look, I think it's very difficult to start saying that I want to ban protests for things that I disagree with. I want to let protests happen for things that I agree with. I don't think we should be banning things until something bad happens. I think that's just a function and a feature of a liberal democracy. For better or worse, we've got to live with it.
Cool. All right, I think we might just have time. I'm just going to check back in with New York, if that's all right. I think we can just show you some of the scenes that are taking place, live footage. This is this ongoing global day of rage that appears to be taking place, if that's what you want to call it. It started out in Yemen and Jordan. It went around a load of the countries there, Iraq, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. We had some in Malaysia as well. France, of course, the night before. Very unsavoury scenes in France that culminated, at one point anyway, in 3 arrests, all people who were on a terror watch list, one of whom had stabbed a teacher to death at a school and injured 3 others. There was an incident in China as well that took place, in Italy, in Rome. This is now the latest from New York, which is a pro-Palestine demonstration. Of course, as yet, it is yet to, and hopefully it doesn't, kick off, as it were. These are people making their own voices heard. Look, can I just say thank you very, very much to all my wonderful guests and my fantastic panel this evening. Really appreciate you coming in, really appreciate both of you as well. It's not quite the show that we had planned initially, is it? But there you go, we were overtaken by global events and we can pivot on a sixpence here at GB News. That is it from me. Thank you very much, everybody who's taken part in this show, who's got in touch as well in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.com. I don't need to remind you of this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Up next is the wonderful Mark Dolan for 2 hours of top telly. He'll be lighting up your television screens. Don't go anywhere. I will see you on Monday at 3 p.m. Yes, I will. Take care.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care